Usually when we talk about epic stories, especially these ancient foundational ones, there's this expectation of a grand, sweeping, cinematic opening.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you picture a massive drone shot
Right.
capturing the creation of the cosmos, galaxies spinning into existence.
The macro scale of existence.
Raging floods covering the earth, towering monuments like the Tower of Babel just piercing the clouds.
The grand canvas of humanity trying to, answer the biggest possible questions about the universe.
But then, you step into the material you've handed us today. Welcome, learner, to this custom-tailored deep dive into the source material.
Glad to be here.
And we have a fascinating stack of sources for you today. We're talking university lectures from open Yale courses, historical insights from the Encyclopedia Britannica, archaeological analyses for the Biblical Archaeology Society.
Really heavy hitters.
Yeah, and theological deep dives from the Bible Project and OUP Academic. And our mission today, we are looking at the patriarchal narratives found in Genesis 12 through 50.
Which is quite the narrative shift.
It's completely wild. All of this high-level academic firepower is focused on a text where that sweeping cinematic camera just drops.
It really does.
It falls out of the sky, completely ignores the great empires of the ancient world, bypasses the massive armies, and zooms all the way down into a single, dusty, rather unimpressive tent.
It is arguably the most jarring narrative shift in ancient literature.
Right.
Yeah, it's the ultimate pivot from the universal to the fiercely particular. You are moving from the origins of the universe to the domestic disputes of a single, highly dysfunctional family.
Exactly. So we know you, the listener, prefer multiple perspectives, so we're going to give you a balanced look at the history, the literature, and the theology without getting bogged down in all the academic jargon. We want to figure out how ancient stories about a flawed, semi-nomadic family became the theological bedrock for billions of people.
And what it says about human nature.
Yes, and divine promise, and dealing with our own modern anxieties.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we look at the book of Genesis, it's essentially, two completely different books mashed together, isn't it?
Yeah, it functions as two distinct halves.
Yeah.
But, you absolutely cannot understand the second half without the context of the first.
Okay, how so?
Well, Genesis chapters 1 through 11 deal with universal origins. They are asking, what kind of world was made, and fundamentally, why is it so broken?
So that's the creation, the devastating flood.
Right, the fracturing of human language and community at the Tower of Babel. The scale is global.
The problems are global.
Exactly.
Which makes that pivot in chapter 12 so strange to me. We go from the Tower of Babel, which is like the pinnacle of human civilization trying to reach the heavens, straight to a guy named Abraham.
Living a semi-nomadic life.
Yeah, just being told to pack up his tent and walk into the desert.
The entire scope of the book narrows to national origins. Genesis 12 through 50 focuses hyper-specifically on one family line.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph.
Right. And the narrative proposes this really radical idea. It says this single, very specific family is going to be the means through which the globally broken world of chapters 1 through 11 is ultimately healed.
I want to look at how the text itself frames this, actually. There's a specific Hebrew term that sets the stage for the whole book, right?
Yes, Bereshit.
Bereshit.
It translates to in the beginning, or at the beginning. It's the first word of Genesis, and it frames the canonical context of the entire book.
Yeah.
But what happens in these patriarchal narratives establishes what the Encyclopedia Britannica sources call the theological grammar for the rest of Scripture.
Theological grammar. I like that. But break that down for me. How does a family's history act as grammar?
Well, think about how grammar functions in language, right? It dictates the rules of how sentences are constructed.
How meaning is formed, yeah.
Exactly. In the biblical text, the patriarchal narratives dictate the rules of how humanity interacts with the divine. The sequence of concepts is highly intentional here.
Okay, what kind of concepts?
So, in this text, divine promise precedes the giving of any law. Election, which, just means being chosen for a specific purpose, election precedes any sort of human achievement.
Wow, okay.
Divine grace arrives on the scene before any human response is even possible. The text is setting up a paradigm where this family isn't chosen because they have the strongest military or the most profound philosophy or the best moral track record.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on that a little.
Sure.
If God's whole redemptive plan hinges on fixing a global fracture like the fallout from Babel, why rely on one tiny flawed family to fix a universal problem?
It's a great question.
Right. My first instinct as a modern reader is If you have a massive universal problem, you initiate a massive universal solution.
Hmm.
Why not pick an empire like Egypt or Babylon to broadcast this blessing to the world?
What's fascinating here is that if the divine chose a massive empire like Egypt to bring about this universal blessing, the natural conclusion for the reader, both ancient and modern, honestly, would be that human power was the mechanism of salvation.
Oh, I see. It would look like military might or cultural dominance pulled it off.
Exactly. It would look like human achievement. By intentionally choosing a landless, aging, geographically displaced, and biologically barren couple in a dusty tent, the text insists that any resulting blessing is purely an act of divine grace.
So the utter weakness of the family is actually the point.
Yes, the weakness is the feature, not a bug.
It forces the reader's focus onto the promise maker rather than the promise receiver, because the receivers clearly do not have the resources to pull this off themselves.
Precisely. And the goal isn't narrow tribalism at all. The text states right from chapter 12 that Abraham is blessed specifically so that all the families of the earth may be blessed.
The particular is chosen to save the universal,
You nailed it.
which, logically, brings us to a massive question. Since the story zooms in on this specific family in the ancient Near East, my instinct is to ask for receipts.
Receipt.
Yeah, like, do we actually have any proof these people existed in history exactly as written? Are we looking at a rigorous history book, a mythological epic, or, something else entirely?
It's a highly contested area, and our sources, particularly the Open Yale courses and the Biblical Archaeology Society, advocate for a stance they call epistemic honesty.
Epistemic
Yeah.
honesty, which is a fancy academic way of saying what exactly?
It's a fancy way of saying we need to be ruthlessly honest about what the evidence actually says and what it doesn't say.
Without overclaiming.
Exactly. No overclaiming.
Okay, before we go digging in the dirt, let's talk about the text itself. Who actually wrote this down? Impartially speaking, what do the sources say?
Impartially speaking, there's a wide spectrum of thought here. The traditional view, which is anchored in classical Jewish and Christian thought, points to Mosaic authorship.
Meaning Moses wrote or compiled this material.
Right. On the other end, modern critical scholarship approaches Genesis as a composite literary work.
Meaning it was pieced together over time.
Yeah, they see it as being shaped through various oral traditions, written sources, and layers of redaction. Many critical scholars argue the final polished compilation likely happened much later in Israel's history.
Like when, roughly?
Perhaps during the exilic or Persian period, so roughly the 6th to 4th centuries BCE.
Okay, so regardless of whether it was penned by Moses early on or finalized by editors centuries later, the actual setting of the story is portrayed much earlier.
Correct. We are talking about the early 2nd millennium BCE.
A Middle Bronze Age.
Yes, the era of semi-nomadic clan leaders migrating between Mesopotamia cities like Ur and Haran down the Levant into Canaan, and eventually seeking refuge in Egypt.
So if we take our archaeological shovels to those ancient trade routes, do we find an inscription that says Abraham slept here?
We absolutely do not.
Oh, really?
Really, archaeology does not directly identify Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. We don't have name tags. We don't have inscriptions. There are no royal chronicles listing their deeds.
Well, doing biblical archaeology is kind of like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle without the box cover.
That's a good way to look at it.
You might find a cluster of pieces that look like a tree, but you don't know the exact picture. But wait, if there's no direct proof, isn't it just a myth?
Well, that's where the epistemic honesty comes in. We don't have direct proof of the individuals, but we do have an overwhelming amount of contextual evidence.
What kind of contextual evidence?
Take the Nutsi tablets, for example.
The Nutsi tablets?
Yeah, these are thousands of cuneiform clay tablets discovered in northern Mesopotamia, dating to the mid-2nd millennium BCE. And what they reveal is startling.
What's on them?
They document laws concerning adoption, complex inheritance disputes, marriage contracts involving surrogate servant girls if a wife was barren.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and the extreme legal importance of possessing household gods.
And all of those incredibly specific, strange legal quirks are exactly what we see the patriarchs doing in Genesis.
Yes. We also have the Mari letters from the 18th century BCE.
Okay, and what do those show?
They show us the specific West Semitic names common at the time, the exact travel routes the patriarchs are described as taking, how tribal grazing rights functioned.
Wow.
Even how individuals would report prophetic dreams to their superiors, which perfectly maps onto Joseph's experiences later in Genesis.
So holding that middle ground, these parallels show a shared ancient Near Eastern environment.
Exactly. It shows narrative realism. The authors or editors intimately knew how the ancient Near Eastern world operated, they accurately depicted the administrative bureaucracy of the Egyptian court, which makes the story of Joseph's rise socially intelligible for that specific era.
So it confirms plausible historical horizons without claiming direct proof of the narrative.
Precisely. The narratives are completely tethered to Bronze Age realities.
Well, let's pull the thread on those Bronze Age realities because the socioeconomic conditions these people lived in were, incredibly gritty.
Oh, absolutely.
We read these texts in comfortable chairs, but these people were living on a knife's edge. Let's talk about the economics. Wealth back then wasn't, stocks and bonds.
Far from it. Wealth in this text was measured in three very vulnerable assets: access to water wells, livestock, and grazing land.
So it was a pastoral, semi-nomadic existence.
Driven by seasonal migration, trade caravans, and the ever-present terrifying specter of famine.
And a famine back then didn't mean the grocery store was out of your favorite bread. A famine meant the complete eradication of your family line.
Right, which is why the family structure was literally everything. This was a strictly patrilineal clan society, driven intensely by honor and shame.
Lineage was survival.
Exactly. Sons mattered immensely, not just for sentimental reasons, but because they preserved the family name and, crucially, the inheritance of the property. Without a male heir, your lineage evaporated.
Your clan's economic survival and social standing in the region were just wiped out.
Wiped out entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. This fundamentally shifts how we understand the marriages in these stories.
It really does.
We tend to read Isaac and Rebekah, or Jacob and Rachel, through the lens of a modern romance. But in the ancient Near East, an arranged marriage within a kin network wasn't a romance. It was essentially a high-stakes corporate merger.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. It was about consolidating property, ensuring mutual defense, and surviving the elements. It wasn't about love at first sight.
And recognizing that corporate merger reality unlocks one of the most central theological tensions in all of Genesis.
Okay, lay it on me.
If sons are the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for economic survival and cultural honor, then the recurring theme of the barren woman in Genesis is explosive.
Oh, well. Because it happens in every generation. Sarah is barren, Rebekah is barren, Rachel is barren.
It is a profound theological edge. From a literary standpoint, the barrenness places the family at the absolute brink of extinction over and over again.
So how does the constant threat of famine and barrenness impact the way we as listeners should view the character's faith?
It forces a situation where divine promise absolutely must overcome human biological limitation. The only way the family survives, the only way the covenant continues, is if divine promise actively intervenes.
It's not just a personal tragedy, it's an existential crisis for the entire redemptive plan.
Exactly. And this extreme vulnerability explains a lot of their bizarre behavior. The Open Yale Courses source emphasizes this brilliantly. Revelation from God came to these people long before any formal religious institution existed.
There was no temple, no Torah, no priesthood yet.
Right. They were vulnerable household heads. The divine met them in their most desperate, gritty needs, the need for land and seed.
It's a deeply practical, localized religion. And we even see this with the household gods, the teraphim.
Yes, the teraphim.
There's that crazy scene where Rachel steals her father Laban's household statues when she and Jacob flee. For a modern reader, it's totally baffling. Why risk your life over some little wooden figurines?
Because in that culture, possessing the teraphim wasn't just about personal devotion. Legal scholars of the ancient Near East note that possessing the household gods often signified a legal claim to the family inheritance.
Wait, so it was like stealing the deed to the house?
Basically, yes. By taking the gods, Rachel might have been trying to secure a portion of her father's estate. It illuminates the inseparable connection between household structure, property rights, and ancient religion.
Religion wasn't a separate weekend activity. It was the legal, economic, and social fabric of your family's survival.
Exactly.
What blows my mind is how these raw cultural realities aren't just thrown together randomly like a historical logbook. Our sources from OUP Academic highlight that all of this is woven into a shockingly brilliant literary structure.
The literary architecture of Genesis is masterful. The entire structure of the book is held together by a specific Hebrew formula called the Toledah.
Toledah, meaning these are the generations of or the descendants of.
Exactly. It creates a narrative genealogy. Instead of just jumping geographically from place to place, the Toledah formula channels the entire epic specifically through the family line.
These are the generations of Terah, which leads to Abraham.
These are the generations of Isaac, These are the generations of Jacob. It signals to the reader that the physical lineage itself is the theological backbone of the story.
And within that structure, the writers use some incredible literary devices, like the concept of type scenes.
Oh, type scenes are fascinating.
I like to compare them to musical leitmotifs in a film score.
Mm.
Like when you hear the Imperial March start playing, you don't need anyone to tell you Darth Vader is about to walk into the room.
The music does the narrative heavy lifting.
Right. So in Genesis, when a character travels to a foreign land and stops at a well, the original ancient audience would hear the marriage plot music start playing.
Hmm.
The wife at the well type scene happens over and over.
Abraham's servant finds Rebekah at a well. Jacob finds Rachel at a well.
Later, Moses finds Zipporah at a well. Why a well, though?
Functionally, it was the social center of the ancient world. But literarily, when the narrator sets a scene at a well, the audience instantly anticipates a betrothal. We also see birth announcement type scenes and the recurring motif of the endangered wife in a foreign court.
But perhaps the most sophisticated literary feature in the text is irony and chiasm.
Yes, chiasm. Where the second half of a story mirrors the first half in reverse order, you see this heavily in the Jacob narrative.
Jacob's very name implies being a deceiver.
Or a supplanter. He spends his entire youth tricking his brother Esau and deceiving his blind father Isaac. But what happens when he flees to another country?
He is ruthlessly deceived by his father-in-law Laban, who switches the brides on Jacob's wedding night.
The deceiver is deceived in the dark. The irony is palpable.
But out of all these devices, the biggest literary motif our sources emphasize is reversal. Specifically, the reversal of the younger sibling over the older sibling.
This is arguably the most subversive element of the patriarch stories. Think back to the socioeconomic reality we established. In a strict patrilineal society, primogeniture, the firstborn son inheriting the vast majority of the wealth and leadership, is the absolute bedrock law.
But the narrative constantly, relentlessly flips it. Ishmael is the older, but Isaac is chosen.
Esau is the firstborn twin, but Jacob gets the blessing.
Later, Jacob intentionally crosses his arms to bless Joseph's younger son, Ephraim, over the older, Manasseh. It's a blatant disregard for ancient societal norms.
It is entirely intentional. By constantly subverting the cultural law of primogeniture, the text demonstrates that election is based entirely on divine grace, not on human custom or societal hierarchy.
The divine is not bound by Bronze Age inheritance laws.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what's fascinating is the narrative economy of the text.
Narrative economy, meaning the text is incredibly sparse.
Yes. Ancient Hebrew narrative is famous for this. The narrator almost never pauses to explicitly explain why God is doing what he is doing. You don't get a neat philosophical summary at the end of every chapter.
Which is maddening for a modern reader who wants everything neatly categorized.
It can be, but that sparse divine explanation is a brilliant literary tactic. It invites the reader and you, the listener, to lean in. You have to read the dialogue closely, watch the actions, and engage in deep theological reflection.
The text forces you to wrestle with the material, which is the perfect transition because nobody wrestles quite like the patriarchs themselves.
That's very true.
Let's dive into the specific character cycles filling that literary structure, starting with the flawed founding fathers, Abraham and Isaac.
The Abraham cycle kicks off in Genesis 12 with a stunning, disruptive divine command. Lay.
Go forth.
Or literally, go to yourself. He is bound to leave his country, his kindred, and his father's house.
In a clan-based society where your family is your only police force, your only bank, and your only safety net, leaving your father's house is essentially social suicide.
It is a command to step into absolute vulnerability. And in exchange, God gives Abraham a three-part promise. He promises him land, he promises him seed or offspring. The Hebrew word is zirah. And he promises him blessing, berha.
But here's where we have to look closely at Abraham's actual track record. I mean, how can the quote-unquote father of faith be a guy who repeatedly puts his wife in danger to save his own skin?
It's a harsh reality of the text. Almost immediately after getting this promise, a famine hits. He goes to Egypt, and he lies about his wife Sarah being his sister because he's terrified the local rulers will kill him.
He risks the very covenant promise. And later, when the promise of a child is delayed, he and Sarah get impatient and coerce her servant, Hagar, to produce an heir, Ishmael.
Which leads to massive trauma and family fracture.
So how does the text justify treating this guy like the hero?
What's vital to understand is that the text is not trying to hide his failure. The writers aren't embarrassed by Abraham's cowardice or his impatience. The text isn't hiding failure, it's displaying covenant grace.
Because if he were flawless, his blessing would just be a wage he earned.
Exactly. Because he is so deeply flawed, the blessing can only be understood as a sheer gift, which makes Genesis 15 really the hinge of his entire story.
That's where Abraham believes, and it is counted as righteousness, right?
Yes, the Hebrew word for righteousness there is tzedakah. Faith here is defined as relational trust, not moral flawlessness.
He trusted the promise maker.
Yes. And this brings us to the most difficult part of Abraham's story, Genesis 22, the Akedah, or the binding of Isaac.
This is where God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. It's terrifying.
It is. The text explicitly says God tested Nisa Abraham. But our sources urge us to read this carefully. God is not seeking information he doesn't already know. It's a profound narrative crucible of testing and substitutionary provision.
Right, because Abraham finds a ram caught in a thicket to sacrifice instead. It establishes a theological pattern that God will provide the sacrifice required.
Exactly.
After that climax, we move to the son, Isaac. And Isaac is, well, he's the quietest patriarch, a continuity figure. I like to compare Isaac to the middle runner in a relay race.
That's a great analogy.
His job isn't to be flashy. It's just to safely pass the baton. He redigs the exact same water wells his father dug. He receives the exact same promises.
His life is marked by repetition, but theologically it teaches that God sustains an already spoken promise. Faith is sometimes simply redigging the old well and trusting the water is still there.
Okay, so if Abraham and Isaac passed the baton, the next two generations nearly dropped it entirely. We move to the most dramatic character arcs in the text, the wrestler and the dreamer, Jacob and Joseph.
Jacob's arc from Genesis 27 to 37 begins with him as a deceiver and striver. He steals his brother Esau's blessing and escapes to his uncle Laban.
But the turning point is Genesis 32, right?
Yes, at the Jabbok River, he wrestles a divine being in the dirt all night.
And as dawn breaks, the being strikes Jacob's hip, permanently dislocating it. But Jacob clings to him, and he is told, Sharita, you have struggled, and is renamed Yishol, Israel.
The theology here is a theology of sanctified weakness. Jacob gets a blessing, but also a permanent limp. God's promises are mediated through discipline and fracture.
He walks into his future limping. That is so resonant. But of course he passes down the dysfunction of favoritism to his son, Joseph.
Joseph's arc is a massive epic. The favored son, sold into slavery by jealous brothers, rises through the Egyptian court of Paras the Pharaoh and saves the region from famine.
So what does this all mean? I mean, I compare Joseph's story to a brutal demotion that inadvertently places you in the exact position to become the CEO and save the company. But how do we reconcile human free will, the brother's sin, with God's providence?
The core theological line is Genesis 50.20. Joseph tells his terrified brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good."
The climax of providence and wisdom in Genesis.
Yes. Our sources clarify that Genesis 50.20 is not a denial of evil, nor does it make God the author of sin. It is a providential rereading of evil, showing how human malice operates inside divine governance without defeating God's good purposes.
Okay, we've covered immense ground. Moving from the ancient stories to their ultimate legacy, let's talk about redemptive history and contemporary relevance. Why do these specific narratives matter to the listener today?
If we look at the legacy through a Christ-centered interpretation, the New Testament completely absorbs these patterns.
Like Paul in Romans and Galatians.
Yes, Paul anchors the entire concept of justification by faith apart from works on Abraham's messy but trusting life. Abraham is the father of faith, but Christ is the ultimate seed, the Zerah, extending the promise to the nations.
Isaac's near sacrifice anticipates Christ's substitutionary pattern, and Joseph anticipates the righteous sufferer exalted for the life of many.
Exactly. The covenant family is a community of promise, not perfection. The overarching theme is that human status is unstable, but divine promise is not.
I compare the patriarchal narrative to a fractal. It's a small pattern, one dysfunctional family's redemption, that repeats on a macro scale for the redemption of the entire world. So directly to you, the listener, if you're feeling the pressure of family dysfunction or the anxiety of a delayed promise, how does this ancient text change your perspective?
This raises an important question regarding how we view our own struggles. In a world that prizes control, the patriarchs reveal a God who forms people through waiting, disruption, and trust.
They weren't given full maps. They were given just enough light for the next step.
Their story proves that spiritual maturity grows through delay and loss, not instant success. An election isn't for privilege, it serves mission.
What an incredible journey this deep dive has been. We moved from the cosmic scale of creation down to a dusty tent in Canaan, tracing the flawed but chosen lineage of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We did. And the ultimate takeaway for you is that God's promise outruns human impossibility, and that His grace is big enough to handle our deepest failures and family fractures. But before we go, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I like this part.
Yeah, at the very end of Genesis chapter 50, after all the famine and drama, Joseph dies. But he makes his family promise to carry his bones up out of Egypt when God eventually comes to their rescue.
A powerful moment.
It really is. Think about Joseph's bones. He didn't live to see the final fulfillment of the promise, but he insisted his bones be part of the future journey. What bones, what unfulfilled promises or deferred hopes are you carrying with you right now? And are you willing to trust that, even if you can't see the destination, they are still part of a larger, providential story? Keep digging, keep learning, and join us for the next deep dive into the sources.